Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. I am Reshma Tiwari and with me is Akhila A, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring to you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman says India is putting across the voice of Global South at G20. Conference on knowledge sharing for emerging economies in Global South gets underway in Hyderabad. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to visit India from 8 to 10 March to discuss strategic partnership and other related issues. Japan pledges financial and technological support to ASEAN countries to combat climate change. A fire at a fuel station in Jakarta claims 17 lives, leaves 60 severely injured. 3 suspects arrested for shooting a provincial governor and 5 others in Philippines. And in cricket, the first Women's Premier League in Mumbai, Gujarat, Giants chase a target of 208 set by Mumbai Indians. And now the news in detail. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan is going to change the face of India's infrastructure and its multimodal logistics. He pointed out that India will achieve the target of becoming a developed nation by 2047 with infrastructure development as a driving force of the economy. He was addressing a post-budget webinar on the subject of infrastructure and investment, improving logistic efficiency with PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan today. The Prime Minister said country has to improve its speed and move in top gear.
अब हमें टॉप गियर में चलना है और इसमें पीएम गति शक्ति नेशनल मास्टर प्लान की बहुत बड़ी भूमिका है। भारत के इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का, भारत के मल्टी मॉडल लॉजिस्टिक्स का कायाकल्प करने जा रहा है। ये इकोनॉमी और इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर प्लानिंग को, डेवलपमेंट को एक प्रकार से इंटीग्रेट करने का एक बहुत बड़ा टूल है।
The Prime Minister said with quality and multimodal infrastructure, logistic cost is going to reduce further, which will have a positive impact on the goods made in India. The Prime Minister emphasized the need to integrate the concept of circular economy with the sector. Mr. Modi said, under the National Infrastructure Pipeline, the government is aiming to invest 110 lakh crore rupees in the coming years.
हमारा कैपेक्स साल 2013-14 की तुलना में 5 गुना अधिक हो गया है। नेशनल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पाइपलाइन के तहत सरकार आने वाले समय में 110 लाख करोड़ रुपए इन्वेस्ट करने का लक्ष्य लेकर चल रही है। ऐसे में प्रत्येक स्टेक होल्डर के लिए ये नए दायित्व का, नई संभावनाओं का और साहसपूर्ण निर्णय का समय है।
Mr. Modi said electrification of railway tracks is now reaching 4,000 kilometers per year, adding that the number of airports and seaport capacity has doubled as well. Elaborating on the role of the states, the Prime Minister informed about the 1-year extension of interest-free loans up to 50 years, and budgetary expenditure for this has been increased to the tune of 30%. India's President Draupadi Murmu launched the Jal Shakti Abhiyan Catch the Rain 2023 campaign in New Delhi on Saturday. The theme of the campaign is Source Sustainability for Drinking Water. Speaking at the event, the President said that water conservation and management are the most important issues for India, as only 4% water resources are available in the country. She said the traditional water conservation ways have disappeared in the country due to unplanned urbanization, which has led the world to the issues of water scarcity and global warming. She added that there is a need of ours to restore and manage traditional methods of water conservation while adopting new technologies. President Murmu said the Government of India started Swachh Bharat Mission and Jal Jeevan Mission, keeping in mind the problems faced by women. Recognizing the roles of women in water conservation and sanitation, the President conferred the Swachh Sujal Shakti Samman 2023 under various categories of the Swachh Bharat Mission, Gramin, Jal Jeevan Mission and National Water Mission. The awards were given to acknowledge the leadership and contribution of women coming from grassroots level in the journey towards making of a Swachh Sujal Bharat. On the occasion, she also launched a video on Jal Shakti Se Nari Shakti and a commemorative stamp. The President released Swachh Sujal Shakti Ki Abhivyakti, which is a compendium of case stories from Swachh Bharat Mission Grameen, Jal Jeevan Mission and National Water Mission. Speaking at the event, Jal Shakti Minister Gajendra Singh Shekhawat said that under the visionary leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, India has achieved a path-breaking success under the Jal Shakti Abhiyan Catch the Rain. The minister added that Amrit Kal is a true revolution in the field of water and has strengthened the vision of water conservation.
Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has expressed delight at what she described as India being the voice of the Global South at G20 and putting forward the matters of concern. Speaking at the Raisina Dialogue in New Delhi, the Finance Minister said the debt stress issue of the small, emerging and developing economies is one such issue which was unanimously taken up with all seriousness.
One item on which there was complete unanimity. The G20 was one. There was no difference of opinion. And India was able to convince that we need to deal with the low-income countries. I'll name the country, one of them, Sri Lanka. There was complete unanimity that we have to deal with debt-related stress issues as early as it is required.
Ms. Sitharaman reiterated the need for reformation of multilateral institutions, including the World Bank, that deal with the funding of development issues. She emphasized there should be no delay in the process. The minister said that India has an expert panel on how multilateral development institutions should respond to 21st century challenges. India's Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal confidence that the country's merchandise and services exports would touch $750 billion this year. He also informed that the export figure for the last year had already been crossed in February. Speaking at the Raisina Dialogue in New Delhi, the minister underlined that the focus on sustainability and quality will hold India in a good state in the times to come. Highlighting the government's efforts in bringing quality consciousness, he informed that the number of quality control orders have grown by over 4 times and now stands at 440 products. He said that it will grow up to 2,000 in next 2 years and help the country in achieving its zero defect, zero effect aspiration. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on Raisina Dialogue.
The theme of this year's Raisina Dialogue, India's flagship conference on geopolitics and geostrategic affairs, has a very interesting construct and a set of outlines which intensive conversations over the next 2 days will attempt to fill. The theme of the 2023 edition of the Raisina is Provocation, Uncertainty, Turbulence, Lighthouse in the Tempest. So over the course of the next 3 days, more than 250 odd people, decision makers and thought leaders are going to be engaging in over 100 conversations in various formats to deliberate over 5 thematic pillars, which include neo-insurgence, which is geographies, domains and ambitions. Then the second one is amoral mosaic, which is contest, cooperate or cancel. And the third is chaotic codes, sovereignty, security, society. Then the fourth is pernicious passports, climate, commons and citizens. And the final one is grey rhinos, democracies, dependencies and debt traps. Now, this particular edition of the Raisina Dialogue is especially significant because it comes in the year of India's presidency of the G20, during which time India will aim to move ahead in uniquely Indian ways to resolve some of the most pressing problems that afflict the world today. The attempt of the Raisina Dialogue will be to provoke some answers that can serve as a beacon towards a resolution of issues of peace and security, global trade, food and energy security, and much else. What will India's approach be, and what would India be looking for as it steers this particular ship? I am joined by 2 distinguished guests, Ambassador Shilkant Sharma and Ambassador Bhashwati Mukherjee, to help us understand some of India's priorities in this endeavor. Ambassador Sharma, if I may begin with you, What do you make of the Raisina dialogue theme of provocation, uncertainty, turbulence, lighthouse in the tempest? How will this help guide the G20 presidency year?
Thank you, Nilova. The theme actually rhymes with what an eminent Nobel laureate said for this Amritkal, that India is a city on the hill. For most of the countries in the world, they look up to India for providing, a way. And that has been the consistent attempt by the Indian government under the leadership of our Prime Minister, and our Foreign Minister has been articulating very well on the themes. The city on the hill, or this lighthouse in tempest, is a very powerful metaphor. And as the Italian Prime Minister said in her opening address, she developed this theme. That the way she developed it actually resonated with our own approach. Now, G20, when it synchronizes with this kind of geostrategic and geopolitical dialogue in the Raisina conference, we have two aspects. The G20 was totally statist. It's all formal governments. And the diplomats, they are bound by positions. So India, on the one hand, is negotiating and traversing through these formal positions to come out with something which is for common good, which will lead to dealing with the problems which bedevil our societies and our countries. And in that respect, the global south takes prominence. So that is the India way in which they are traversing this difficult field where the diplomats come with formal positions. On the other hand, the Raisina dialogue has 100 countries represented, 2,500 participants, but they are not bound by these formal positions. So they are invited to expostulate freely on these matters, which are these 5 themes which you narrated. So the topicality of the G20, and it enervates this dialogue. And the third point which you mentioned is also very significant, that suddenly from this vast canvas of G20 and the intellectual dialogue of the Raisina dialogue, you have picked up the Quad meeting which our Foreign Minister today held, and his quotations which you gave. Now, that shows something very tangible, very palpable, and he describes what requires, what to do. So these three together actually make a very good combination of the themes, which those 5 themes. I would like to just mention one more point, which is that the first theme is about the domains and the sovereignty and ambitions, geographies and ambitions and domains. That actually spans out the challenges today. You have technology domain, which actually encompasses problems and solutions. You have geographies which are physical, where you have territories and countries and sovereignty. And you have ambitions. You have leaders who put the subjective factors into this whole melee. So how do you combine them? It would be interesting to hear the people in the Raisina dialogue talking about these intersecting points. It is an open question how Raisina dialogue will make sense of these problems, and towards the end how they will conclude with some kind of way forward. It is important because talking for the sake of talking doesn't make sense. So it has to be coherent and directional. So that is what is the expectation from the Raisina dialogue, that the multiple participants and the diverse themes, how do they gel and lead to some kind of a coherent result with a direction. It's a vector.
Right.
So that's what I feel.
Ambassador Mukherjee, Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji yesterday raised a couple of these issues in his address to the G20 foreign ministers. When he said multilateralism is in a crisis today, and in terms of preventing future wars and fostering international cooperation, which were its 2 major tasks, do you think the whole construct of this particular meeting is intended to provoke countries who are perhaps errant in some ways into doing something cohesive to help resolve a lot of the issues that have arisen in the world today?
Thank you, Nilova. I think the Prime Minister's message also indicated that in India's perspective, multilateralism has failed because it does not reflect the new global order. And because it does not reflect the new global order, you have diminished powers trying to control international peace and security issues. I say that because you have to put it in the context of the Quad. The Quad, on the other hand, is a grouping that reflects the New World Order. And as Dr. Jaishankar rightly pointed out, it has leaders who are not encumbered by the baggage of the past. And that links up with India's efforts in the past, which have been unsuccessful, along with Japan, for example, to reform the UN Security Council on one hand, and on the other, to find groupings outside the UN multilaterally, which would reflect the new global order and which would be able to play a more important role on international peace and security, as indeed the Quad, which is intended to ensure peace and security in the Indo-Pacific. The membership of the Quad, again, is very significant because China is not a member, and it is a pushback against a rising militaristic China. If you link it back to the themes of the Raisina dialogue, again, the Raisina dialogue, which is a geostrategic dialogue, is hosted by India. This is the 8th Raisina dialogue. It again shows India's growing clout internationally because earlier such geostrategic dialogues were only hosted by G7 countries. But the fact that India is presiding over the G20, it is also the president of the SCO, the fact that it was only yesterday that Lavrov met Blinken on a corridor of Rashtrapati Bhavan. Both tried to say that it was a chance meeting. In diplomacy, one never knows what is chance and what is fixed, and it's better not to speculate on it. But the point is, it was their first meeting after the Ukraine conflict. And if you look at the themes, which are provocation, uncertainty, turbulence, lighthouse, and the tempest. If you break them down, the themes, they mesh perfectly with what we are trying to do in the G20 context, which is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. In the Quad context, that is peace and security in the Indo-Pacific. And in the Raisina dialogue, the problems raised by provocation, the problems raised by uncertainty, the problems raised by turbulence, and in my interpretation, the lighthouse in the tempest is India, because India is in a position to be able to, if the protagonists agree, to have talks around talk to bring an end to the Ukraine conflict. So therefore, I would say that this is a very layered message that our Prime Minister gave. We have the G20, we have the Quad, and we have a geostrategic dialogue taking place just after the G20, coinciding with Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. And so at the end of the day, it would be extremely interesting to know what this dialogue has to offer by way of addressing the theme, and in particular the theme Lighthouse in the Tempest. For me, that is a beacon of hope, a light in a troubled and turbulent ocean, or which perhaps the major players, including the G7, could perhaps hold on to as a possibility to find a way out on all sides, because there's no doubt that the Ukraine conflict has not worked out the way that the West thought, because it has deeply impacted their economies, particularly of the European Union, many of whom are now in a state of active recession.
What do you think would be the best way forward at this point for Dr. Jaishankar and for India to be guiding these very, very touchy and sensitive waters, as it were? How best can we act as that lighthouse of hope?
Well, I think the themes which have been set up by the ORF, supported by MEA for the Raisina dialogue, provide an opportunity for External Affairs Minister and for India to look at emerging ideas which could perhaps be innovative and which could show the way forward out of our intractable conflict, which, as Sheil said, could actually extinguish the light of the lighthouse, especially if there is a nuclear exchange. Because the danger here is that if new and innovative ideas are not accepted on both sides, and the NATO is perceived to be seen by the other side as getting directly involved, then you can have a nuclear exchange, which is why possibly that Blinken told Lavrov, apparently, in the corridor of Rashtrapati Bhavan, that the United States expects Russia to get back to the arms control commitments which they have now got out of publicly, Putin said in his statement, expressing his disappointment on various issues. So those arms control agreements also prevent nuclear conflict, and therefore the light in the lighthouse, which we must make sure does not get extinguished, can get extinguished if there's a nuclear exchange. So I would say that the Raisina dialogue provides us a welcome opportunity to look at innovative ideas coming outside the box thinking and to see whether they can be utilized by India to persuade the main protagonists, including those who are encouraging a proxy war so as to bring down the other protagonists, to see whether they can be in some way in a position to actually have a torch of light through the darkness, through the storm, to show the way forward. This is exactly what Rabindranath Tagore said when he, in his Bengali poem, Ekla Chalo Re, when in his last verse he wrote that when the night is full of storm, it is our responsibility to show the light forward, even if you have to take out your own rib and set it on fire. But if it is the correct path, we do go down that correct path. And that message of Rabindranath Tagore actually illuminates the final theme of the Raisina dialogue in my perspective.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Sharma and Ambassador Mukherjee, for a very stimulating discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hyderabad is hosting a meeting on the theme of Knowledge and Experience Exchange Program for the emerging economies of the Global South during 4th to 6th March. It will provide a platform to discuss ways to accelerate development in the Global South. The inaugural session of the event, India and the Global South, a vision for a shared future, was addressed by G20 India Chief Coordinator Harshvardhan Shringla in Hyderabad. The second session was focused on digital public infrastructure, a digital revolution on global financial inclusion. The third session was on financial inclusion through digital innovations, knowledge and experience exchange. A side event on the topic of role and significance of G20 and GPFI also took place. On the first day, the delegates engaged in discussions on topics such as leveraging digital payment infrastructure and exploring digital innovations to further enhance global financial inclusion. In his inaugural address, Mr. Shringla highlighted India's financial inclusion success story and the way it has transformed the lives of Indians. He also addressed participants from over 40 countries and regional organizations from the Global South on India's experience in financial inclusion. The meeting was held ahead of the second meeting of Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion in Hyderabad. On the sidelines of the G20 Foreign Ministers meet, the Quad Foreign Ministers met in New Delhi on 3rd March. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, Japan's Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi and Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong attended the meeting. They called for lasting peace in Ukraine and underlined respect for territorial sovereignty and integrity. The Quad ministers also targeted China's aggressive behavior in the Indo-Pacific as well as its attempt to block designation of terrorists at the United Nations. They agreed to set up a new working group on counter-terrorism and looked forward to a meeting in the U.S. of the working group on maritime security. They also decided to engage more closely with the Indian Ocean Rim Association, a grouping of 23 members which includes India and Australia.
Let's listen to the weekly roundup for G20 events this week.
G20 India 2023. One Earth, one family, one future.
The events and activities this week under India's G20 presidency were marked by a series of landmark events. However, the spotlight was on the foreign ministers' meeting and the first meeting of the anti-corruption working group. The G20 Women's Inception meeting was another attraction. A 2-day-long W20 Inception meeting was organized in Chhatrapati Sambhaji Nagar in Aurangabad in western Indian state of Maharashtra during 26th and 27th February. The focus was on 5 priority areas. These include women in entrepreneurship, women leadership at grassroots, bridging the gender digital divide, education and skill development, and women and girls as change makers in climate resilience action. 2 more rounds of Inception meetings will be held at Jaipur in Rajasthan during 13th and 14th April and at the W20 Summit in Mahabalipuram, Tamil Nadu on the 15th and 16th of June. Another major event this week was the first anti-corruption working group meeting of G20 nations in Gurugram in the North Indian state of Haryana during March 1st to 3rd. Union Minister of State for Personnel, Public Grievances and Pensions, Dr. Jitendra Singh, led the deliberations with India as the co-chair of the group. At the meeting, India called upon G20 nations to adopt multilateral action for faster extradition of fugitive economic offenders and recovery of assets both on the domestic front and abroad. The problems faced by a country when its economic offenders flee from the jurisdiction was also highlighted. Over 90 delegates from 20 member countries, 10 invitee countries and 9 international organizations attended the first meeting of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. This is the first ACWG meeting, which will be followed up at Rishikesh from 25th to 27th May for the second ACWG meeting and at Kolkata from the 9th to the 11th of August for the third ACWG meeting. A side event was also held on the theme of leveraging information and communications technology for combating corruption in the public sector. The big story this week was the meeting of G20 foreign ministers in New Delhi during the 1st and 2nd of March. The leaders discussed global challenges including climate change, food and energy security, and global supply chain disruptions. The chair's summary and outcome document of the meeting was released at the end of the deliberations. Focus was on issues like strengthening multilateralism, ambitious climate and environmental action, deepening cooperation on sustainable development, counter-terrorism and disaster risk reduction. The outcome document said the threat of the use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible and peaceful resolution of conflicts is vital. It stressed that a more inclusive and reinvigorated multilateralism and reform aimed at implementing the 2030 agenda is essential. The foreign ministers called for urgent action to tackle climate change and implement the Paris Agreement. External Affairs Minister of India Dr. S. Jaishankar held a media briefing on the 2nd of March after the foreign ministers meet in New Delhi. He noted that for the first time G20 foreign ministers discussed the topic of counter-narcotics and called for inclusive and strong international cooperation in this regard. All the G20 countries and 13 international organizations took part in the deliberations. The G20 Conference on Materials for Sustainable Energy was held in Ranchi during 2nd and 3rd March. The delegates urged the need to work together and solve the energy challenges to achieve carbon emission net zero goals for environment protection and sustainability. Various facets of materials for sustainable energy were discussed at 3 sessions. These include 21st century challenges related to energy materials and devices, solar energy utilization and photovoltaic technology, and materials and processes for green energy. 21 foreign delegates from 16 G20 member countries, invited guest countries and international organizations participated in the conference, along with about 40 Indian experts. The conference was coordinated by the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, New Delhi. As a follow-up of this conference, 3 more RIIG events will be held in Dibrugarh in Assam, Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh, and Diu. The themes will be circular bioeconomy, eco-innovations for energy transition, and scientific challenges and opportunities towards achieving a sustainable blue economy, respectively. The upcoming week will have a series of events in Hyderabad. Focus will be on the second meeting on the Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion under the Finance Track.
G20 India 2023. One Earth, one family, one future.
The Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Anthony Albanese, is scheduled for a state visit to India from 8 to 11 March 2023. Mr. Anthony's visit is response to Prime Minister Modi's invitation. This is Mr. Albanese's first visit as the Prime Minister. He will arrive in Ahmedabad on 8 March 2023 on the day of Holi and in Mumbai on 9 March 2023.
In Philippines, a provincial governor and 5 other people were shot dead by unknown gunmen on Saturday. Local police said the perpetrators, carrying rifles and dressed in uniforms similar to those worn by the armed services, entered the governor's home in Pamplona town and opened fire.
At least 17 people have died in a huge fire that broke out on Friday after 8 p.m. local time at a fuel station storage operated by Indonesia's state energy company Pertamina in the capital, Jakarta. 60 people have been reported to be injured and many others severely burnt. The cause of the fire is yet to be ascertained, while Indonesian officials are urging for an audit of all fuel facilities and infrastructures. Japan's government pledged financial and technological support to help ASEAN countries accelerate their efforts to decarbonize their economies and combat global climate change. Japanese Industry Minister Yasutoshi Nishimura said that Japan will take a lead in providing generous support in finance, technology and personal resources to help Asia's decarbonization.
The inaugural edition of the Women's Premier League commenced this evening with the opening match between Mumbai Indians and Gujarat Giants at the D.Y. Patil Sports Stadium in Navi Mumbai. Chasing a target of 208 runs set by Mumbai Indians, Gujarat Giants were at 54 for 8 in 13.3 overs when reports last came in. And that is the end of today's World News edition.